He was the kind of man whose inner world burned brighter than anything around him, the kind of mind that never lived at the surface of things. Stephen moved through life as if he was listening to a frequency the rest of the world had forgotten how to hear. Some people believe boldly, others believe quietly. Stephen believed with a clarity that felt like standing in the center of a storm and somehow sensing the stillness that the storm itself could not shake. What made him different was not simply his courage, but the way his courage was born. It wasn't loud. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't the heroism of a man who wanted to be seen. It was the quiet inevitability of someone who had already died to everything that frightened other people. The things that make a man hesitate no longer existed inside him. Fear cannot negotiate with someone who has already surrendered his life to something larger. Stephen carried inside him the intensity of a man who had fully processed the reality he believed in, not an inherited belief, not a cultural belief, a belief he had examined, internalized, tested, and finally surrendered to. Most people stop halfway. They accept truth, but never let it reshape their psychology. Stephen was what happens when a belief sinks past the intellect and into the architecture of the personality. When that happens, the mind stops being divided. The self becomes aligned, fused, integrated. That inner alignment created a remarkable kind of stability in him, and stability is dangerous to those who live on borrowed certainty, because people who are unsure of themselves cannot tolerate the presence of someone who is not. What drove Stephen was not ambition. Ambition is self-directed. His clarity was other-directed, outward, upward, anchored in meaning rather than ego. He had no need for power, which is why power feared him. He did not depend on public approval, which made public condemnation ineffective. He did not react from insecurity, which made threats powerless. His psychology was frightening to his opponents, because they had mastered the art of controlling fearful men, but they did not know what to do with a man who had nothing left for them to control. When he spoke, there was a particular quality in his voice, a steadiness that did not come from confidence, but from conviction. Not the emotional kind of conviction that shouts and trembles, but the intellectual, spiritual kind that comes from having looked at truth from all sides and finally decided to kneel before it. He did not speak to impress. He spoke because silence would have been a betrayal of what he knew. And there is something uniquely threatening about a person who speaks because he must, not because he wants to. His words were not ornaments. They were declarations. That purity stripped them of fear. Stephen's mind had a deep memory, a sense of history, an ability to connect the present moment to a much larger pattern. He saw events not in isolation, but as part of a long line of divine human interactions. This gave his psychology an unusual dimension. He felt anchored not only in faith, but in narrative continuity. He did not see himself as a man making a random stand. He saw himself as one voice in a long story that stretched back before him and would stretch long after him. People who think they are alone in their moment tend to panic. Stephen did not think he was alone. He knew he was standing inside a lineage of courage, truth-telling, sacrifice, and spiritual defiance that shaped his internal resilience. At the core of his psychology was a strange blend of boldness and gentleness. Boldness can make a person harsh. Gentleness can make a person fearful. In Stephen, the two did not cancel each other, they completed each other. His boldness gave his gentleness strength. His gentleness gave his boldness humanity. That is why his words cut deeply, but never cruelly. That is why his confrontation could not be dismissed as arrogance. His conviction did not come from pride. It came from love. The kind of love that cares more about the long-term salvation of others than their immediate comfort. But love, when clear, becomes confronting. And nothing is more psychologically unbearable than being confronted by someone whose love exposes your self-deception. His opponents could not understand him. They expected fear. They expected negotiation. They expected compromise. They expected emotional instability. But Stephen's composure was disarming. Composure is the quietest form of courage. It denies the enemy their expected victory. He did not rage. He did not plead. He simply stood there with the calmness of a man who had already resolved the ending of his own story. When a man is prepared to lose everything except truth, he becomes untouchable. There is a moment in every persecutor's mind when hatred becomes mixed with confusion. They look into the eyes of the person they are trying to break and realize the psychological power dynamic has inverted. The persecutor is the one trembling. The persecuted is the one steady. This inversion happened in the minds of those who judged Stephen. They were loud, he was calm. They were agitated, he was centered. They were many, he was one. But psychologically, He was the largest presence in the room. Inside him, there was no rebellion, no bitterness, no desire for revenge. That is another rare psychological trait. The ability to speak truth without hatred. Hatred gives truth a different flavor. Hatred tries to win. Love tries to heal. Hatred tries to conquer. Love tries to redeem. Hatred tries to destroy opponents. Love tries to awaken them. Stephen's mind was not fueled by hostility. He did not want to defeat his enemies. He wanted to free them from their blindness. That posture created a paradoxical compassion, even in the face of death. And compassion, when paired with courage, is one of the most psychologically powerful combinations in existence. What held him together in the final moments was not denial. He was fully aware of what awaited him. But the human mind has two ways of interpreting suffering, as chaos or as calling. Chaos crushes a person. Calling strengthens them. Stephen interpreted his suffering as calling. That interpretation altered his emotional experience. He did not see himself as a victim, but as a witness. And witnesses do not crumble under weight. They endure it. Even in agony, his psychology was shaped by clarity. He did not mistake the violence of men for the silence of God. That distinction preserved him from despair. Many people fall into spiritual confusion when suffering arrives. They assume pain equals abandonment. Stephen did not. His inner logic was different. Pain was not a contradiction of God's presence. It was participation in God's purpose. This reframing turned pain into testimony. In his final moments, something extraordinary happened at the level of consciousness. Instead of collapsing inward into fear, Stephen expanded outward into vision. The human mind normally withdraws when facing death, shrinking into instinct. But Stephen's mind unfolded. Vision is the opposite of fear. Fear narrows awareness. Vision widens it. That widening lifted him above the moment. While stones flew, his consciousness was elsewhere, anchored in the reality that made the moment small. And this is the final truth about his psychology. A person cannot be broken by the world when their mind has already stepped beyond it. Stephen's psychology was the psychology of a man whose inner world was more real than the outer one. A man who lived with eternity pressing so close that time could no longer intimidate him. A man whose peace did not depend on safety, whose clarity did not depend on approval, whose courage did not depend on survival. He was not fearless because he was strong. He was fearless because he was surrendered. And surrender, the complete yielding of the self to truth, creates a kind of strength that no earthly force knows how to dismantle. He did not die defeated. He died consistent, aligned, whole, fully himself until the last breath. And a life that ends in full integrity is never a tragedy. It is a completion.